Okay, we're going to bring in our two panelists for this evening. The aim of this WES Talk tonight is to, well, the aim of the whole series of WES Talks actually, is to explore life and faith in today's world, often by linking to historic characters who tried to make a difference and thinking about some of the issues that our world faces today. This evening, we're posing the question, how can we work for peace in an angry world? And first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our two panel members this evening. First of all, Revd Inderjit Bhogal. Welcome, Inderjit. Inderjit is a former president of the British Methodist Conference, former leader and chief executive of the Corrymeela Community in Ireland, and a recipient of the World Methodist Peace Award in 2018. He has been a tireless worker for human rights, racial justice, humane immigration policies, religious freedom, and adequate housing for all. One of the peace-related movements initiated by him is City of Sanctuary, a grassroots network and movement to build cultures of welcome, hospitality, and safety for asylum seekers and refugees and other vulnerable people. In 1997, Inderjit walked from Sheffield, where he lives, to 10 Downing Street to hand deliver a letter to the Prime Minister asking for a fairer deal for asylum seekers. He says walking like this was one demonstration of his anger at a particular injustice. Inderjit is president of the Methodist Peace Fellowship and honorary president of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He's currently working with churches together in Britain and Ireland on the Church of Sanctuary project to encourage local congregations to become churches of sanctuary. Oh, there's a lot in there, Inderjit. And then we move to John Cooper. Welcome, John. John Cooper is director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He leads on their campaigns, education and fundraising, and recently travelled to Fiji with the World Council of Churches to find out more about Britain's nuclear legacy in the South Pacific. He's previously worked for Christian Aid, the Joint Public Issues Team, and All We Can, which was then MRDF. He has a personal interest in the social history of Christianity and their links, crossovers into stories of everyday change makers. To that end, John volunteers on the management executive of Anglesey Brook, Museum of Primitive Methodism. In his spare time, he enjoys life with two small children, watching films, growing food, and reading. He enjoys listening to podcasts and hosts the Fellowship of Reconciliation podcast, the Peace Cast. And I believe we've got a link to that for people who want to find out more about that. Thank you both for being here this evening and taking part in our discussion. First of all, I'm going to ask Inderjit to speak for about 10 minutes on our question this evening. Inderjit, when you're at the end of your 10 minutes, maybe you'd like to just say, and now John, over to you. And then John will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have some general conversation and some questions from our attendees. So thank you, Inderjit.
Thank you, Mandy. Thanks for the welcome. And I greet everyone who's joined this webinar with peace and the blessings of God. I'm sure you could be doing 3 or 4 other things, but you've chosen to be here. And I and John, I'm sure we feel honored that you are spending the evening with us. And I hope we will have a fruitful conversation together. To go straight to the topic, we are living in a very angry world, and quite rightly so. There is much to be angry about. There are the protests at the Uyghur genocide in China. There's the oppression in Myanmar. There's a police shooting of a black man in Minneapolis in USA. There's the Ethiopian war and outrages in the Tigray region resulting from that. We've had Extinction Rebellion. I joined it actually in the city of Bristol. We've had Black Lives Matter protests, the toppling of the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol, and there's the opposition to the controversial police and crime bill aimed at the prohibition of protests when police have the capacity to intervene if they think there's a nuisance being caused. There's the right to protest, or to express anger, if you like, is under threat. And that concerns me deeply, because in the Christian tradition, in scriptural biblical tradition, there's a great place for the expression of anger. We see it in the prophetic tradition and in the practice of Jesus. Elijah was described as a troubler of Israel, and Jesus is seen expressing his outrage at exploitation in the place of worship. So there has to be a place for anger and a way to express anger. I felt very angry at the way asylum seekers were being treated when I chose to walk to London. Some of them were in the detention centre in Yarlswood near Bedford, and they'd gone on a hunger strike, and I wanted to highlight that, and wanted to express my anger at what was going on, and decided to send a letter to the Prime Minister. Well, that would have cost me 25p at that time, but I chose to walk to London to underline how serious this was and how angry I felt. So we have to have some way of expressing our anger, but holy anger, I would say, is best expressed in holy protest. And holy protest is more than just being opposed to something. It's more than just saying no to something. To say no is just half of protest, but protest is holy when it shows a new way forward, another way of taking action. And protest gives expression to what you are in favor of. Pro means to be in favor of what you are in favor of. Test is to testify. It's about testifying to what you are in favor of. So it's not enough to say no to war. It's important to say yes to peace. It's not enough to say no to that which kills. It's important to say yes to that which gives life. Say no to death, yes, but don't stop there. Say yes to life. And I want to say that we have to find ways of expressing protests that are constructive and show a different way to that which you're protesting against, and to challenge people to live differently. City of Sanctuary, for example, it was my thought that how do you challenge hostility, particularly to the most vulnerable people, particularly to refugees and asylum seekers? And what is there in the Christian tradition that we can draw on? And I felt that the way to challenge hostility is to demonstrate hospitality. So rather than just saying, I don't like hostility, I wanted to show how to respond differently. And I think always we have to be able to do that, to show a different outlet, a different way for direction and for action and for life, and ways which are non-violent. Violent protest is a contradiction, because if you are protesting against violence, then it doesn't make sense to use the very means that you are opposed to. And so you have to do things differently. For example, the language, kill the bill. I don't like that. Why use terms like kill? Let's find different terminology. And I think Christian tradition has to provide that, and it does provide that. I want to finish what I'm saying to you with a story. So Mandy talked about my walk to London, and I've been involved in lots of walks, and I think walking is a good way of expressing outrage. The million who walked in London to say no to war and attacks in Iraq, the Make Poverty History campaign, walking in Edinburgh, and so on. I worked for a while in Wolverhampton, and there was an awful killing of a young black man, not unlike the story of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And he was shopping, and a shop attendant rang the police saying there was some fraudulent activity going on. The police came along. In the course of his arrest, he died. This is a man called Clinton McKerbin, and it was later said that he died of asphyxia because a police had been sitting on his neck. This is in 1986 in Wolverhampton. And of course, there was a great deal of anger and outrage, not least from me. And 10,000 people turned up in Wolverhampton from all around the country for to protest at police violence and racism. And Christian leaders and leaders of all faiths in the very multi-faith Wolverhampton directed all worshippers to refrain from joining this march, and you're not supposed to go there. And I went against the instruction of my district chair, my superintendent, all the leaders of religious leaders of different faiths, and I chose to walk. And a few other people came out of the woodwork from different faiths and decided to walk with me. And they said to me, "So Inderjit, where will you be walking? Are you going to be at the back?" I said, "No, I'm going to be right at the front." And on that day, I wished I could be a bishop and have a mitre and be as loud as possible to say that the church is here. There are people of faith who are bothered about what's going on, and we are angry, and we do want to express our anger. And so we will walk at the front, and we will bear witness to what will happen, because the media of the world is here, and what they want to show is black people being violent. So we will walk at the front and walk with dignity and show a different way of expressing protest. The march progressed. We came to a flashpoint, which is the point where Clinton died. His mother wanted to lay some flowers there. The police refused to let her go. And I was right at the front. We stopped. And the chief of the police came over to me and said, "Are you in charge of this?" And I said, "Well, you could say that," although I wasn't. He says, "Get this march moving." So I said, "You let this mother place flowers where her son died, and I promise you we will move." He said, "Can you promise me that?" I said, "Yes, we will." And so he spoke into his walkie-talkie, as it was then, and this line of the police moved aside, and the mother could go and lay the flowers. And I said to Mrs. McKerbin, "We'll see you around at the other end of the street. We will walk that way." And when we got to the point where we were going to meet her, that was the next flashpoint. And there were police in riot gear with their shields at the front. Then there were police on horsebacks. Then at the back, there were police in vans. And then there were police on foot. Because they were expecting violence at that point. And the media of the world, yes, they were taking their positions because they wanted to see a fight between black people and the police at that point. And sure enough, there were youths with bricks who had turned up, and they wanted to have a riot battle. At that very point, right in the middle of the police and those who wished to express violence, I decided to stand there, right in the middle of them, and began to say, "You to the youths, you throw one brick today and you've lost the battle. You've lost your your concern. Do not throw any bricks, because that's what the media wants to show the world, to show that you are violent young people, and don't give them that picture. So I started to say, we want justice, not violence. We want justice, not violence. And all of a sudden, others started to say that. We want justice, not violence. And, you know, we were there for maybe 15 minutes shouting just that set of words. And it grew into a chorus and a crescendo. And gradually the march moved on, and it kind of then ended in a peaceful way. And the media, the next day, there was nothing in the papers, of course, because they didn't get the picture to show violence. And I had to search the papers to find even 2 or 3 lines about that amazing moment in Wolverhampton. And as the march moved on, I found myself standing there by myself with 2 or 3 others, and I was it was snowing and it was freezing cold, but I was dripping with sweat because it had taken that much energy to prevent what the local newspaper called would be war in Wolverhampton. And of course, I had to then stand in front of my circuit meeting a few days later to explain why I walked. And what I was able to say was, I think I prevented war with the help of others in our town. And I think we stopped damage to people and to property and to community relations. So what I'm saying to you, my dear friends, is that we have a part to play. We have to show um, an alternative way to violence. We have to show that we can express our anger in a non-violent way. Yes, there is a place for anger. We live in an angry world. There is a lot to be angry about, and quite rightly, but we have to express our anger in constructive, positive, non-violent ways, because to express our anger against violence in a violent way is a contradiction, and I can't see how anyone with a Christian perspective can support that. Thank you. So, John, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Inderjit. Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to join this virtual gathering hosted in the radical city of Bristol and one of the spiritual homes of the Methodist movement. Both the city and the Methodist movement have deeply shaped the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Did you know that Walter Ayres from Bristol North, the MP, was a lifelong member of the Fellowship? The Methodist movement gave rise to people such as Donald Soper, who took a prophetic message of peace to the global stage. It's my job today as director of the FOR to speak on a topic which has been central to our movement's message and activity. As Inderjit is our honorary president, there are many echoes in what I say from what he has said. I'm going to explore through places, people, and situations how we can live and work for peace in an angry world. To begin with, I think we all need to take time to recognize that we do live in a world that is not at peace. Either peace between people and nations, or people, or between people and planet. It's easy to think, if we have a relatively quiet life, that that must be the same for everyone. However, that is rarely the case, as Dr. Martin Luther King, another FOR member, recognized in 1956. It's a false peace that we exist in if it's built upon the economic, racial, or other exploitation of others, because in reality, then it's only us who live in peace and not everyone. Looking back over the pandemic, it is undoubtedly clear that it is not really peace that many of us have lived in, but privilege. One major privilege many of us live with is the privilege of having white skin. We may say systemic racism is a scar upon the world. However, that constant naming is only now beginning to change. Few people, let's be honest, would ever say they were racist, but that doesn't mean they themselves don't have racist thoughts or carry out racist actions. The painful and visual death of George Floyd popularized a movement that had been around for decades. Its global ripple, which led to the famous dunking of Coulson here in Bristol, really occurred because the issue began to move from head to heart. And how do we really begin to bring about that change? To look not just at why people are angry, but to feel the reasons for the anger. Let's think for a moment about John Wesley. He preached upon how people could accept the brutality of poverty. He wrote the main reason the rich have so little sympathy for the poor was because they didn't spend time visiting the poor. Indeed, he goes on to say, one part of the world does not know what the other suffers. Many hundreds of years later, that is still very true. And yet we live in a world where that is no longer as easy to do. Mobile technology has transformed our ways to speak and communicate. It's enabled movements not just to be built on ideas, but images, faces, people. The liberation of communication methods has made it easier for people to share their first-hand experiences. And this is beginning to transform the potential for anger to turn into action. Just this very night, the Church of England will no doubt be discovering that for all its weighty and heavy reports about racism, the Panorama report, due to air in about 30 minutes, will last much longer. The faces, the names, the stories of people hurt by institutional racism will live on, and that will be the anger that advocates for change. So if we've recognised our peace may be a false peace and we've begun to listen, what do we do then? I think what we do is roll our sleeves up and get active. And for this, I always look for inspiration from one of the fellowship's grandmothers in peace, an inspiring woman, sometimes known as the only Baptist saint, Muriel Lester. She was a whirlwind for peace for about 50 years. After spending most of the First World War speaking up for peace and against war, she recognised the immediate pain and lack of economic peace in her surroundings. She rolled up her sleeves and worked with her sister to create Kingsley Hall in Bromley by Bow, Tower Hamlets, London. This centre became a vibrant and challenging piece of social work. But it didn't just keep things local. It acted as host to international guests, including Muriel's friend and Indian peace campaigner Mahatma Gandhi. It acted as a soup kitchen during the general strike and a host hall to the workers walking to London from Jarrow. In short, she rolled her sleeves up, got her hands mucky, and reminded everyone that peace is not simply about are you pro or anti-war, it's about something much deeper, much more long-lasting. And it's about transformation, and it's about community. That transformation lived on, and her hall at the end of the Second World War was one of the first places to call out for economic help for Germany at the end of the Second World War. But for all her standing up for peace, she was also a member of a fellowship. I see a great list of many names in the attendees here. And I think we can all know, whether we've been an active peacemaker or a presbyter, a member of a church, a campaigner, or whatever, that standing up for what we believe in an hurt and angry world can be an immensely tiring thing. Social media aggravates and activates people quickly, but it also tires us out. It can bring first-hand stories of pain and hurt that activate us, but it can also hurt the people who find themselves constantly having to share and reshare their stories of pain and hurt again and again. And that's why it's important to be grounded in something. For us at the fellowship, it's about being grounded in our Christian faith. It provides us with a focus, provides us with strength. Prayer and shared conversations, the creation of community, are really important to powering us through. Muriel Lester, who I just referred to, said, consider yourself not ready to start the day until you've spent at least 15 minutes in prayer. Count it as much a social necessity as washing. Now, I'll be honest, and maybe this will get me sacked, I don't always manage 15 minutes a day to start the day in prayer, but it's a helpful reminder that all of our activity is not just about us. Indeed, one of the core visions within the fellowship, which was developed by Dr. Martin Luther King, was that of the beloved community. The beloved community for Dr. King is a group of people that gather together, share their struggles, seek support and an end to poverty, hunger, homelessness, racism, and aim to replace bigotry and prejudice with sisterhood and brotherhood. It recognises the need for peace to be twinned with justice and aims to adhere to the 6 principles on non-violence. It's a moving community with a vision it's going towards. It's a glue that holds us together. And it's also because we act for peace in an angry world in community that sometimes we can be loud, we can be at the front of the protest as Inderjit described. And at other times we recognise this is our time to lift up other members in our fellowship. It's a time to sit back, maybe to write a check, or to pray, or to give a quiet word of support and advice to a new young person coming through, bursting with ideas and energy. Because you're still being active for peace then. You're recognising that peace is about a bigger picture. And sometimes you step forward, and sometimes you let others step forward. But this vision and this picture is really important because it reminds us we're not just acting in an angry world, we're not just acting together, we're acting for a positive vision. Inderjit's covered quite clearly the need to focus on that core Christian principle of hope. For me, it's central to why any Christian activism advocacy for change is important. It's one of the key attributes we bring to the table. We're not just against something. We're here because there's a better world bursting into life and we want to be part of that midwife act. A few weeks ago, we were privileged to work with the Student Christian Movement to host a conversation with Reverend Harold Good. He's been a very inspiring peacemaker, and he shared a brief story. It's 1993, and Alan McBride has lost his wife Sharon and father-in-law Desmond in a blast that became known as the Shankill bomb left by the IRA. 10 people, including one of the bombers, was killed in total. For many years afterwards, Mr. McBride was known to stand up and shout at public meetings, demanding an apology from Gerry Adams for that bombing. I wanted to say, he said, that was not right. I wrote articles, I was on the news, I was just so angry. I sent photographs of his wife to him on her birthday, on anniversaries, at Christmas. And yet, one time, 16 years after the bombing happened, Harold Good, a man who had overseen the decommissioning of the IRA's weapons, found himself inviting the 2 of them into his house, making a cup of tea, simply watching as Alan and Gerry Adams came face to face to talk, to shake hands, and to recognise the pain that had been caused. It was a huge moment, not just for the peace process, institutional, but for those 2 individuals as humans. Began to break down barriers. It recognised pain that people were living with. It recognised anger. It recognised hurt. But it didn't let those feelings and emotions become the end point. Simply by the Christian act of hospitality, the beginnings of peace were continuing to emerge. In these last few minutes, I've set out to demonstrate just some of the ways that people have been active for peace in an angry world. There are many more I could have covered, including Greta Thunberg's amazing non-violent action of going to protest, of being a public presence. But for me, all of the stories that I've shared capture that heart, which is one of offering restoration and hope, powered by fellowship, yet grounded in lived experience. It's enabling people to look beyond the immediate and help bring to life the world as it was created to be. Humans as we were created to be, right relationships as they were created to be. Building peace in an angry world is a lifelong commitment because we cannot truly be ourselves at peace unless everyone is at peace. So building peace in an angry world is possible, but it's also at times overwhelming. It's at times energizing. It's exciting. It's challenging. And it's vital. So to finish, I think it's best to misquote John F. Kennedy and say, in an angry world, maybe it's time to ask not what can peace do for you, but ask yourself today, what can I do for peace? Because we've all got the skills, tools that we need to build a little corner of peace in a very angry world. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Inderjit, and thank you, John. I feel like we need to hold a moment of maybe the rest of the talk we can just sit in silence and think about all the amazing and profound things that you've both said already this evening. Thank you so much for both of your contributions. I have sort of scrolled down some questions that I wanted to ask you both, but I'm also really conscious that there's probably a lot of attendees tonight who might already want to ask questions of you both. And what I'm going to say to everybody in attendance is, if you have got questions for Inderjit and for John, please start to put them in the Q&A section, and we'll start to look at those and hopefully start a conversation around those questions in about 5 minutes. So you've got a little bit of time to think on those. I was really interested, Inderjit, that you talked about the things that have been happening in Bristol, the protests that have been happening in Bristol, very, very close to the New Room, actually, and obviously happening in different cities around the country as well, about the police crime, the sentencing in the courts bill. It's been interesting being in the same city as one of those protests. From my observations, I would estimate that about 90% of the protesters in those protests have been peaceful, and about 10% of the protesters have resulted to quite extreme violence. And obviously we've seen those pictures on the news. And I guess my question is, how do people who want to peacefully protest get their point across without being hijacked by others who might want to do it a different way? I think you may have already answered this with the story that you told, Inderjit, but it's about, so I think really the question is, how, if we want to protest in a peaceful way, how do we ensure that that doesn't get hijacked by people who want to be violent?
It's not easy, Mandy, but I think one of the key actions we can take is to be there, and to play our part in keeping people calm. And it can be done, but you can only do it if you're there. One of the problems is that sometimes people think it's going to be a bit violent, so I'm not going to be there because I don't want to be linked up with violence. But actually, don't let that put you off. You should try and be there. And then what the media want, as I said, they want violence, and that actually provokes violence sometimes. And so the media have got some answers, some questions to answer. We need to engage with the media and to talk with people who have influence in the media to look at how to convey the news in a different way. But it seems to me that as some people have said, for example, there's been decades and decades of conversation about the statue in Bristol, got nowhere. Some people just toppled it, and it's just happened, and now it's created a global phenomenon, and people all over the world have got the message and are doing something about it, and it's been a kind of a more I don't know, it's created more action for change than all the kind of dialogue that's been going on for long time. So it's not easy, but we need, I think we need to be there. We need to engage with the issues and put the points over as clearly as possible. So when that statue was being toppled, for example, I was thinking, where would I be? And I think I would have been there. I may not have pushed it over, but I would have been there, and at least to be able to tell the story in a different way. So the Wolverhampton situation, the myth was that there was violence, but the fact was that there wasn't. And the reason I wanted to be at the front was to be able to explain to people what actually happened rather than what people thought might have happened. So be there, be at the front, play your part and tell the story and communicate the message constructively and positively.
John, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, a few different things. I think, first of all, we need to recognise that the police crime sentencing and courts bill is a really problematic piece of legislation. So next Wednesday evening, the Network of Christian Peace Organisations are putting on an event called A Christian Calling to Serious Annoyance ? Because that is the phrase that's being used to declare if a protest is causing trouble. And what central to that evening is really going to be exploring some of what Inderjit has said. And the reason it's of major concern is because that's the whole point of protest. Protest doesn't emerge because people are content and everything is well. Protest emerges because something is wrong and something is broken. So you are going to get up the noses of people. It's highlighted often during Martin Luther King Day. The whole world venerates him at that moment, yet he was heavily hated in his lifetime. And here was a man who, with FOR and others, had committed to non-violence, who had worked carefully and methodically to ensure that some of the 198 different non-violent ways there are to protest, and we can share with you later a link to share that that fun list. Everything from voting, if you aren't registered to vote in the elections, you have another few hours to do, to something much bigger than that. You know, you're not popular at the time if you demand change, because it's only those who are not at peace who demand change. So I think it's tricky with things like the violent photographs that we see from Bristol, because what we read and what we hear are often two different things. Front page headline, police, people clash. A few days later, I read that actually maybe some of the initial reports of injuries from the police were not as true as initially said, or we read that some of the aggravation from other sides wasn't actually there. So I think in a world of social media, the real challenge of non-violence is to stick to non-violence and to create your own stories and share them, so that as the misinformation from all perspective goes about, you're honest and you're true to what you're standing up for in ways that no one else can counter. Because that's the real power of protest, is when the physical violent force, often of the state doing its peacekeeping role in that sense, comes up against a huge mass of people. If the mass of people are there saying we're non-violent, we're just sitting here, and it's the state dragging off the grannies, that's the moment you want to see the difference, not the brick flying through the window.
I now have an amazing mental picture, John, of grannies being dragged off of College Green in Bristol. We have had quite a few questions come in. One very simple one to Inderjit. Inderjit, Kathy has asked, can you tell us where we can find out about Clinton McCurtain and how his name is spelt? Would you be able to help with that?
Clinton McCurbin, that's MC, small c, and then a big large C, capital C, URBIN, McCurbin. I've written the story. You could Google that, actually, his name, and you'll get quite a bit. But I've written my story, and you can get that on my website. So if you just Google Inderjit Bhogal, you'll come to it, and then search for Clinton McCurbin, and you'll get the full story there.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Now, you thought that that's quite a straightforward question, but I don't know if you've seen the rest of the questions in this Q&A section. They're quite chewy and quite tough. Andrew has asked, shouldn't the church be better versed in peace and reconciliation internally? I mean, John has already touched on that slightly in terms of the Panorama programme this evening. I wonder if you'd like to respond to that.
So I think the church needs to desperately spend more time looking at peace and reconciliation. I mean, I was quite struck, for example, within the Methodist way of life, the word peace has suddenly disappeared from sort of public Methodist discourse. Now, I say that because, yes, you could say, well, any word needs to be in there. And yet, particularly under Henry Carter and a few others, peace has been such a vibrant part, at least, of the public social witness of the Methodist Church, that when it comes to writing down the values that we believe in, I feel its absence quite painfully. In terms of internally and how we do right and just relationships, I've sat through enough long debates at conference where you hear stories of immense pain being shared by individuals who think that as a loving, trusting organization of the body of Christ, we should all have got on, and now I've found that we can't. And there never quite seems to be the right way to hear what to do next. In some ways, that's because it's a human-made organization, so it will never get it right. But I think that both our prophetic action and our internal processes need to spend more time reflecting on peace and reconciliation, but to do some of that much more publicly, so we can share the pain together and then the joy of peace and reconciliation.
Inderjit, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, John, for what you've said. I concur with that. I would like to see the Methodist witness for peace being upheld a bit more clearly and visibly. The Methodist Peace Fellowship, good on them, have been doing the work for almost 100 years, and very little known in the life of the Methodist Church. So I don't want us to be particularly a peaceful community, because it's about being able to share our differences and different opinions, but in a peaceful way. And I think it's about modeling peacemaking in how to build peace amongst ourselves. We are a community of different opinions. You know, you look at any issue and we have wide-ranging opinions. Conference this year will be a good illustration of that around the whole sexuality debate. You know, so it's okay to have different opinions. It's all right to not be peaceful, but to be kind of controversial in our conversation. But we should be able to do it with respect and courtesy and dialogue, and verbally non-violent ways as well. You know, we should model how we want the world to be.
Thank you both. Now, we have had a question from an anonymous attendee, and this is a biggie really, and I'm going to ask Inderjit to maybe reflect on this for a minute or so, because of your involvement with the Corrymeela community, Inderjit. We've been asked to reflect on what is your prescription for peace in Northern Ireland now? I realise you cannot do that in a minute.
Well, no, but I think it's exactly what I've just said. You know, the crazy thing is that there are two narratives there, you know, and that's how it's been there for 400 years at least. And it's about being able to talk with each other and in a respectful, courteous way, to be able to say there are different ways of looking at things, different perspectives, and that's all right. But we should be able to live with difference without being divided, and to talk with each other, and to be in conversation, and to see see each other as human beings with needs and desires and hopes and aspirations and hurts. No, so I think that's the important thing. What's lacking, I think, in Northern Ireland, in my view, is the middle space. So you've got the two very different narratives, but we need to grow the space in the middle where people who are willing to work together grow. That kind of community needs to grow. That fellowship that John talked about somehow, and that's the role of organizations and communities like Corrymeela, to create those spaces where difficult conversations can happen. And Corrymeela Community is the only community in Northern Ireland that sustained that for 50 years, and full credit to Corrymeela for that. So I would say, you know, in the light of the current developments there, that work is more urgent and important than ever before. Politically, so you got the unionist side and the, you know, the Sinn Féin, and I think that what's beginning to happen is actually the scores of political parties there, and the Alliance Party is the party that kind of tries to bring everyone together, and the latest figures are that that's the party that's increasing. So I think that space needs to grow politically, spiritually, communally, socially.
Thank you. I realise that that's a huge question to be trying to put into a nutshell, as it were, Inderjit. So
can I add just one small thing? You mentioned earlier about the Bristol riots, and we all saw that splashed across the front pages, and yet the riots and disturbances in Northern Ireland have barely figured beyond that first page at the end of a week of troubles. And I think that if we think about right and just relationships, and for this we have that image of the body of Christ where everyone is not the same, but different parts of the body. I think it's up to all of us to take an interest in what's going on in Northern Ireland, to recognise that there are people in our country with whom we all have lots of different relationships who are badly hurting. Poverty is huge in Northern Ireland, yet we don't really know that. And when the riots were breaking out, we sent messages from FOR England and Scotland to partners through the international FOR active in Northern Ireland, just saying, we know and we recognise what's going on. We can see it. Let us know if we can help. And the messages we heard back were mainly, thank you, because no one is paying attention. So I urge you all to keep reading the news, click through to the fourth layer of news to find out what's going on, because that's the other side of building peace, not letting the violence go on hidden.
It's interesting that we're moving on to thinking about the media now, because David has asked a question, something about what was mentioned earlier. If the media won't report on peaceful protest, does that indicate their ability to control the news agenda for their own ends? There's a lot in that question. And I'm actually quite interested. I know that John is a user of social media particularly. I'm interested really in also how we can engage well online, because social media is can be a place of great connection, great encouragement, but also can be a place of great bullying, trolling, and people bullying and shouting at each other. That is probably two separate questions, to be fair. So I wonder if either Inderjit or John, you would like to reflect on David's question.
So David brings a really good question. I'll go first, Inderjit, just to give you a chance to breathe. I'm sharing a link in the answer to a page that our American colleagues have been involved in, called Waging Nonviolence. So I think the first thing to recognise is that traditional forms of media are often looking for a form of conflict to report on. Dog bites man, not a story. Man bites dog, story. It's still true today. However, the great change that's come about through social media, that's been there for about 30 years now, from the days of handheld video cameras, is to create your own media to look out whether it's positive news or websites such as Waging Nonviolence, or in Bristol, I know that a co-op set up called the Bristol Cable, an alternative news website. So actually to think, okay, let's not give all the power to the main media outlets who often are looking for that flash of conflict and move on, to actually create and share our own stories. In terms of tackling hate and encouraging good debate online, there's a couple of different things. First, to recognise we can all get caught in that cul-de-sac you were describing, Mandy, of positive comment 1 minute, frustrated comment the next, and actually to do a sense check of ourselves. Do I need to engage? Can I just scroll on? And if I'm called to engage, actually, what should I be saying? What should I be doing? That's not to suggest everything is a tablet coming down the mountain with Moses and should be stored for posterity, but to recognize that engaging online is as important and visible as engaging face to face. I know that colleagues from the Quaker movement have recently brought out a report and an information pack about how to tackle racist hatred online, and I'm happy to share that to be shared around afterwards. It was subject of a workshop at a conference we organised a few weeks ago, but I was in another workshop, so I can't give you the full details. But I think the other thing they would be stressing, and I would stress, is that if we feel safe and we see others in a place where they may not feel safe, consider, is this the time we are no longer a bystander and we go back to creating that community by reaching out to a friend and saying, oh, I saw you had a rough moment, are you okay? Or to say, you know what, those sorts of comments are not right, either on your own personal page, sorry, I'm not having them, it's my space, go away, or elsewhere, to either call it out publicly or say to those who run the spaces, I don't think that's right. So it's a bit of create your own positive spaces, share those stories, but also hold yourself to account in the spaces you engage in and what you're allowed to go on.
Thank you. I think that's really wise. Did you want to add anything to that, Inderjit?
Very briefly, I think I am troubled at the way the mainstream media determine what is newsworthy, is whether violence was involved and whether British people were hurt or died. You know, that's what seems to be the #1 priority, to communicate that. So if there's you know, huge outrage and lots of people have died in some African country, you have to search the pages to find the news. It doesn't, that's what Black Lives Matter is all about, to say, why is it only when white people die that's considered to be the news? I mean, so I am troubled by that approach of the media. But within the media, of course, they're all human beings, and there are those who it's important for people of goodwill to engage with them and to work with them, to give them some good stories to share. So we've got some work to do, and I think particularly with local media, we should really engage with the local media and feed in good, positive, good news stories, and local radio, these talk shows, try and phone in, because I listen to those at 9 o'clock on my local radio or Radio 5, and you think only there's some crazy kind of people who get to speak on there and get an incredible amount of time to do so. But to get on there, and I try to do that in my local radio at least, and we should all do that. So to bring in a different perspective. So it's not just the media people who only portray bad stories. Those who get on to talk shows seem to be the people who have the most outrageous, discriminatory opinions, that need challenging, and we should get in there and do so.
And let's not forget, it's not just the news. So I haven't seen it yet, but I understand last night's Call the Midwife covered a thing called Operation Grapple. Now, I don't know how many of you watching know anything about Operation Grapple. I didn't a year ago. And then I was dispatched off to Fiji with the World Council of Churches to meet and speak with people who had lived on the island of Kiribati when the British government tested its nuclear bombs over that island. And it wasn't just service people, it was the people living on those islands who now live 60 years later with our nuclear legacy, drama, radio, cinema, the creative arts all have a great way of actually changing conversations. And I think that when we think about the media, we should think about the broadest range of medias, including actually art and Picasso and those, you know, the great picture of Guernica, which sits above the UN as a reminder of the horrors of war. That's other ways we can take it back and change the conversation.
I did watch the Call the Midwife episode last night, and I'm always amazed when people call it a cozy Sunday night drama, because it is nowhere near a cozy Sunday night drama, and it always speaks really powerfully. And I learned a lot last night about that particular issue, so I'm really glad you raised that. I just wanted to say quickly that we are at 8:30, but I would really like to keep, if it's okay with you, I would like to just keep conversation going for about 10 more minutes. Attendees, if you do need to leave before the conversation is over, that's fine. But if you would like to stay on, this is an absolutely fascinating discussion, and we've still got a couple of, I think what we're going to do is we'll take there's the 2 questions remaining, and then I'd like to ask a question just to finish, and then we will actually finish. So I hope that's okay. Philip has asked about those campaign petition emails that we all get, that people ask us to sign and to donate money to. He's asking, does signing a petition like that have any impact? And he's quoting a friend who was a top civil servant in Whitehall, saying that they don't get much attention. So I wonder what John and Inderjit, what your experience is of petitions. Do they work?
Yes. So 38 degrees is a really famous example. Some politicians are fine with it. Some politicians hate it because it fills up their inbox, and they'll say, oh, you know, we've got other things we need to be talking about. Ultimately, it's a way of getting noticed. However, it's not the only way. So I think that sometimes with petitions, you need to think about, who is it being given to? Some of these online petitions are great at giving you a chance just to wave your flag in the air for 30 seconds and say, I care about this. But actually, it's ones that do things like force a debate in Parliament that are the ones that can have a bit more weight and movement beyond showing that initial groundswell of support. Another example from a few years ago, of course, was the campaign postcard, often forgotten now, but equally important. And while it got to a stage at some point where various departments would, in effect, weigh the mailbags to see how many there were, they still noticed the scale of them. And just occasionally, it was the contents of them that then made the difference. So, for example, the Drop the Debt campaign says one of the main moments was when someone in the Treasury mailroom happened to spot that a postcard came from Gordon Brown's mother. And suddenly him as Chancellor felt like his mother had his eye on him, and he better pull his bootleg, pull his socks up. What that was doing was using a petition device to say, I care. And if you don't use petition devices or write a letter or whatever, then no one will ever know that you care. And that's when evil can continue.
Inderjit, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, John. I mean, just a story from my experience. I do tend to sign the petitions. I can't donate to everything. I just can't afford it, you know. So you have to be a bit more selective about that. But and the campaigns too. But I do sign them, and it's a way of broadening the community of or the fellowship of discussion and conversation. City of Sanctuary organise campaigns and petitions regularly, and although it's not a political organization, but once a year they've been used to holding a parliamentary event in Houses of Parliament, and I've attended some of those events, and it is interesting how in the debate, if you then go and sit in the debate and listen for a while, how much people who are speaking in the debate actually refer to the conversation going on in the room next door and what is being said. And I've just been in there and I heard so and so saying that, you know. So I think we can influence debate, And well, sometimes nothing seems to change, but but we have to just keep at it, keep taking part, and keep widening the discussion.
Inderjit, I'm just going to ask you to stay there because we have got one more question, and it goes back to the comments you're making about Colston and the statue earlier. Carrie is asking, do you think the toppling of the Colston statue had any positive outcomes for the Against Modern Slavery campaign? I mean, from my point of view, it's become much more of a point of education, and people are much more aware of the issues surrounding transatlantic slavery in the 18th century. But I wonder if I don't know if you've heard any more conversation through the toppling of the statue. I wonder if that's meant more conversation about modern slavery.
Well, people are talking about it, and I think it has raised awareness. But what I was concerned was that it might deflect conversation away actually from the issue, which at the time was Black Lives Matter. That's what was the conversation. And of course, Black Lives Matter has a historical root and goes back to at least the transatlantic slave trade, if not further back as well. Yes, but my concern was that some of those issues around what became a kind of a statues conversation was taking us away from the Black Lives Matter conversation, which is the conversation we need to have and we mustn't go away from. And even today, with the decisions being made about the policeman who was involved in George Floyd's death, it remains a live issue, and that's a discussion we mustn't move away from. And I want us to keep going back to that. Don't get digressed.
So speaking as a white person, I think the other side of the importance of the toppling was to recognize for all of us, we have levels of culpability in the systemic racism found not just within individuals, but systems, structures, and a lot of the wealth within the UK. I think it's easy, having grown up in the 1990s, early 2000s mainly, to think that that wasn't an issue. We grew up saying make poverty issue. We grew up saying that we want to protect the planet. We were outward looking. We were looking to the world. We were embracing all people. But ultimately, we still live in a country whose wealth and much of its global influence was built upon the hideous and vicious exploitation of many people around the world, often based upon the color of their skin. And I think that for me, one of the main moments was to shift it from that academic, oh, how do we get it down? How do we do this? What do we do? Which, if you're being polite, it might feel like the council had been doing through all the processes, to actually know we just need to recognize that the continued presence of our imperial history is not for everyone a passive thing. It's not just something that you encounter at living history museums. It's signs of hatred, it's signs of hatred, it's signs of oppression. And so for me as a white person, I hear very much what Inderjit says about not getting stuck on the past, but I think it's opened up for a lot of white people the need to come face to face with that and see what does that mean for us. And it was interesting to see, for example, that Baptist Regents College at the weekend held a conference about critical anti-whiteness from a theological perspective that had between 300 and 500 people in attendance. I couldn't have seen that happening 2 years ago. And I think some of the stark images like that have helped accelerate that and move it from a head issue to a heart issue of justice and peace.
That is really interesting, because the final question that I was going to ask you both is what or who is giving you hope at the moment when it comes to peacemaking? And that sounds like a sign of hope for you, John. I was wondering if you could maybe, as we come to the end, if you could share one thing that is giving you hope at the moment, and maybe any hints or tips you would like to pass on to attendees, maybe one thing you want to encourage people to do as they go away from this webinar this evening.
I get hope from young people. In my old age, I'm spending more time listening to what young people are saying, reading what young people are writing. There's some wonderful books, actually. Malala Yousafzai, Greta Thunberg, Dara McAnulty in Ireland, you know, and yeah, and I'm waiting for more books to be written by young people. I'm sure there are, you know, amazing people of wisdom, young people. I'm talking about people in their not yet 20, even some of them. So that's where my hope is. They are dreaming of a different future, and I thank God for that. One thing to do, I want people to learn non-violence, and I want us to teach non-violence.
John, would you like to, sorry, thank you, Inderjit. John, would you like to jump in as well?
Yeah. Ooh, who gives me hope? So I've been director of FOR for 2 years, and I've physically traveled around the country. I have been to now a lot of Zoom webinars and things. And to be honest, for me, the people who give me hope are just meeting people who try and create peace as they go about their life. That's not about that small hidden peace. It's about people who might be, I'm the only peacenik in the village. It might be someone who for decades had been leading a campaign in their area. But every time I've met with someone who've realized I'm called to be a peacemaker, I can do no other, I leave feeling inspired, because ultimately I'm a sunny side up person. I think the world can and should be a better place than we see it. It was created to be more than this. Our relationships with each other were created to be better than they are. We're not put on this planet to invest billions in weapons of war. We're put here to live a life in a beautiful world which should be vibrant and alive. And anyone who just gives me that new glimpse of that always leaves me inspired. And if you ever want to get me to cry, then sit me down with a film of people finding their rights, and I'll be in buckets of tears in minutes, because it's just wonderful to see people rediscover that zest for life. In terms of what people can do, I'm going to say 2 things. One, because I need to be clear that for me, being director of the FOR means I believe in it, and I'd invite all of you, whether you're a committed peace person or just nibbling around the edges and wanting to find out more, to sign up and join us today. Go to for.org.uk/join. We're just part of a wide network of peace groups, and if you're a Methodist and you say that when you join, you'll automatically be part of the Methodist Peace Network. But I think the other thing to do is just to take time, listen, and draw strength from others. It's at the heart of the fellowship, but it's also at the heart of having as good a life as any of us can do. So take that time, draw that strength, and then maybe I'll meet you again and be inspired once more.
Well, thank you both. I'm so glad that we were able to carry this on past 8:30 for a little bit, because I just think that this has just been such a rich discussion. And I'd just like to say, on behalf of the new room, on behalf of everybody who's attended, thank you, Inderjit, and thank you, John, for being part of this webinar this evening. We're going to be sending out an email to all attendees after the event, which will include details of the Fellowship of Reconciliation and also Inderjit's Churches Together project, Church of Sanctuary, so people can find out more about that. And just a couple of notices, really, as we come to a close. There's always notices. You can also access the New Room's online shop to download past talks in the WES Talks series. And also we've got a good range of books and other items in the online shop that you can purchase. The next talk in our WES Talks series will be on Monday, May the 17th at 7:30, which incidentally is the day on which we hope to reopen the New Room, which is very hopeful. It's a sign of hope from us as well. But on May the 17th, the WES Talk will still be online, and it's going to be titled Craftivism. How can you gain a political voice through craft? And I mean, you might have seen examples of how sewn banners and knitted slogans and other handmade items have been used around the country, around the world, to make a point or to try and change things. So we're going to be exploring the ideas and motivations behind craftivism with Katie Stiles, who's the founder of the We Care campaign, Reverend Rachel Parkinson, the chair of the Wolverhampton and Shrewsbury Methodist District, and Reverend Mickey Youngson, who's chair of the London District. And they're not just coming as Methodists, they're coming as crafters and people who are very creative, but interested in how you use craft to make a point. So if you would like to book up for the next talk, then you can book via the events section of the New Room website. And you can also sign up for our monthly newsletter to ensure that you don't miss any details in the future of the talks that are coming up. That's it from us. Thank you all so much for coming along this evening. We're going to bring a poll question up onto your screen as you go. Please do answer the question before you click leave. But from myself and from the whole team at the New Room, thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.